Joining me once again on the show after too long of a gap is the new hopeful for the Democratic Senate in Michigan. Returning to the show, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be on the show.
It's great to have you here. We talked back in 2020, very different world then. A lot has happened. You're hoping to make your mark on the Senate. And I know there might be, I've seen in the chat, a lot of people in our audience are very familiar with you as we were promoting it earlier on the show. But if you'd like to take an opportunity to introduce yourself, let people know sort of what your candidacy is founded on, and then we can dive into some of the issues.
Yeah, John, I appreciate that. Look, my name is Abdul El-Sayed. The one title I always wanted was doctor. That's how growing up, I spent a lot of my childhood summers in Egypt, where I hung out with my grandmother. She lost 2 babies before the age of 1 of 8 to whom she gave birth. When I'd go to Egypt in those summers, I'd travel about 15 hours and 10 years difference in life expectancy. But I could have gone 15 minutes into any neighborhood in the city of Detroit from where I grew up just north and traveled the same gap. And I wanted to fix that problem. So I became a doctor. And you learn to ask 2 questions: what's wrong and how can I help? And too often you'd have people in your clinic, and the challenges that they face when you ask what's wrong had a lot less to do with physiology, had a lot more to do with the pathologies in our politics. Whether or not they could breathe clean air or drink clean water or afford their groceries or come to see a doctor in a clinic without having to worry about falling into debt. Those challenges, that pain, it was exploited by Donald Trump to come to power, and now he's using it and weaponizing it against the very folks who brought him to power. You look at the Medicaid cuts in that big ugly bill. You look at the SNAP cuts in that big ugly bill. You look at the way that he tanked the global economy to pass a stock tip to his billionaire friends. You look at the ways that they're gutting cancer research, like the one last bipartisan thing that the government even does. And you realize that we can do so much better, but it requires us to actually speak to the pain that people are facing. And too often, as I know you talk about all the time on this show, Democrats can't do that because the very corporations who are rigging the economy are paying contributions through PAC checks into their campaigns. And so they find this message that is not really a message at all, but it's said with a lot of enthusiasm because some consultant said so, that you paid with that corporate PAC check. I'm running the kind of campaign that speaks truth to power, but also speaks truth to pain, speaks to what it would look like in our country if people actually had the power of a union behind them because they could form one or join one. What it would look like to make this the best country to build and scale a small business. What it would look like to guarantee healthcare in the richest, most powerful country in the world. What it would look like to free us from the need to burn fossil fuels so that we could keep paying more to turn on the lights for people who can't even keep the lights on anytime the wind blows. That's the challenge that people face across my state. Those are the conversations we're having. And so I'm grateful to be able to run a campaign where we can speak honestly about the pain people feel and speak truth to power.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of that pain already out there. As you alluded to when you referenced the big ugly bill, there's going to be a lot more of it probably soon. There's estimates of 7 to 14 million people who might lose their health insurance thanks to the right's gleeful rush to hand trillions of dollars over to the wealthy. But so you mentioned healthcare there. You mentioned money in politics as well. I know that Medicare for All is something that you care deeply about. I can see your book in the background there. And we don't know exactly what this primary is going to end up looking like in Michigan. We don't know exactly what the Democrats' messaging strategy will be for those midterms, but are those topics that you think should be sort of front of mind? It definitely seems to me like in 2024, there wasn't really a unifying policy to the candidacies. Is it time to go back to that?
You know, John, I want to just bring this up, and it's a pretty crazy thing that this dude murdered another guy in cold blood because he was an insurance CEO, and is never okay to murder anybody in cold blood. But the fact that the outpouring of rage and support happened to be on the side of the murderer, and that was like a bipartisan thing, it should tell you that people are deeply frustrated by our healthcare system. And I want to be clear, when we talk about Medicare for All, they try to code this as being some sort of a handout for the lowest income people. And I'm perfectly okay with making sure we take care of the lowest income people in our society. But it's not even about that anymore. Like if you have private insurance, you get your pay garnished every 2 weeks or 4 weeks for the privilege of being able to pay a $4,000 deductible to get the healthcare you thought you already paid for. The average point at which people actually pay off that deductible in America right now is in June. So functionally for half the year, You're not even insured, you still gotta pay. That's for privately insured people. Now they're gutting Medicaid and they're trying to privatize Medicare through Medicare Advantage. This is an underlying issue that Democrats, if we had the courage of our convictions, should be talking about. But the reason we don't is because too often the corporate checks coming from private health insurance corporations, coming from big pharma, they're so deep in our campaign accounts that, well, people don't want to talk about it. And I kind of want to talk about it because it's the reason I became a public health professional. It's the reason I went into politics in the first place. But you cannot disentangle a lot of these challenges. The choices that we make about where we spend our money, that's what government does. And right now we're spending it dropping bombs on other people's children rather than investing in our schools. We're spending it in the form of trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the richest people rather than investing in our healthcare. We're spending it in ways that cement corporate power in our politics rather than freeing ourselves of that very same corporate power. And the difference that we're seeing right now is not actually between left and right. I just want to be clear about that, right? A lot of folks are like, well, those are left ideas. This game of left-right is a thing that was created to help people who consume politics by sport to understand the political system. It's not a real thing. It exists in our minds. The real differentiator right now in our politics is between people who have to show up to work tomorrow and people who don't. And I want to advance public policy that frees them of the ways that corporations monetize their lives in some huge ways. And I want to fight for working people. And I think whether you code yourself as a Democrat or Republican, right now it has gotten way too hard to survive in the richest, most powerful country in the world. We can fix that by addressing the public policy and the politics that is allowing too many of the richest people to rig this economy on their behalf.
Yeah, and again, that big bill, another big step in the direction of exactly that. Now, you've been very critical of a lot of these policies throughout. I know that you've been advocating for the Democrats in general to be harder and tougher and more vigilant in the way that they oppose Donald Trump. Presumably, you disagree with the idea that they should all just play dead, like some longtime political advocates have said. But so what form should that come in? Like who's been doing it well? What should Democrats be focusing on in taking a stand against Trump? Are there any things that you think they should not focus on, let slip by? Like, what's the strategy in terms of how you stand up to this administration?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. Number one, if you're elected in this moment, you got to realize that there's more to your job than the procedural part. It's not just about the votes you take, it's about the leadership you show. It's about the way that you can have conversations about the issues at play, and it's about using that position, that platform, to move the conversation in the direction you want it to go. You think about the OG, Bernie Sanders, and the ways that he's been leading. You think about AOC and the ways that she's been leading. You even think about somebody like Chris Murphy, who has recognized that the old way simply wasn't cutting it, and we've got to be honest about the fact that if we spent the last however many years yelling about the risk to our democracy writ large, you cannot now turn around and be like, oh, well, he's the president. And so you've really got to lean in on the leadership part of the job and show that leadership in the conversation that you have with the public. I think that taking votes that put a rubber stamp on people who can't do the jobs when it comes to confirmation, whether it's in the judiciary or it's in the appointments that he's making across the bureaucracy, that's not going to cut it either. RFK should not have earned a single Democratic vote. My man doesn't know the first thing about science, and now we're seeing the consequences when it comes to HHS. Similarly, you think about the fact that Marco Rubio was like the consensus choice, and look, now they've got him wearing 3 hats and he doesn't wear one particularly well in the first place. So I just think that there's a responsibility to leverage your procedure behind the leadership that you show about what you've been saying and what we continue to be saying about what it means to live in a democratic republic. When they're disappearing people off the streets for signing onto an op-ed, that's not normal behavior. When they're sending people to an impenetrable facility, CCOT in El Salvador, because they may have violated what is ultimately their documentation status, that's not normal behavior. That is not consistent with any form of constitutional rights in our society. And so we've got to start acting the part. And you can't just tell people one thing and after the election then kind of go back to normal because it's nice to be a senator or elected representative and the haircuts are free.
I didn't know that. That's actually a nice little perk for them. They work so hard to earn it, by the way.